Hello, and welcome to the fourth episode of We Are What We Read. I'm your host, Kristopher Zgorski, the founder and sole reviewer of the award-winning book blog, BOLO Books. And joining me once again, my co-host, this time coming from a beach vacation where she's taking a break from relaxing to join us, is Shawn Reilly Simmons. Shawn, why don't you tell people about yourself?
Hi, I'm a little sunburned today. It's nice to see you all. Thanks for being here. I can't believe I'm just honored to be part of this with Kristopher, my dear friend. I couldn't believe when he asked me, and I said, of course, I would do anything with Kristopher. He's just a wonderful person, and I'm happy to be any part of anything that you do. Um, I'm Shawn. I've been around for a while. I used to work for Malice. I don't anymore. I retired from Malice after 20 years. I am managing editor at Love of Us Books. I am a writer as well. I've done a few other things, and I'm just happy to be here today. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much, Shawn. In the previous three episodes, I talked first about what inspired this initiative, and then in the second episode, I talked a little bit about what I hope it will do for people. And then in the last episode, the third episode, I talked a little bit about how I was making sure that I populated it with as much diversity as possible. So I don't really have much to say today, except I want to say that it's really about the love of books. It's the love of reading and the significant impact that reading can have on our lives. So I hope that people will listen to what all our guests are saying and how the books have touched them, and maybe something will ring a bell for them, and then we'll rush out to buy a book or read one of the books that are recommended. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get ourselves started. Our first guest today is Bruce Robert Coffin. Bruce Robert Coffin is the award-winning author of the Detective Byron Mysteries and co-author of the forthcoming Turner and Mosley Files with Lindy Walker. He lives and writes in Maine. Welcome, Bruce.
Thank you so much for having me, Kristopher and Shawn, for inviting me to appear on We Are What We Read. I am deeply honored, and let me just say that you have both been unwavering supporters of our genre, and I can't think of two cooler people to have running a program like this. So thank you. The book I've chosen today is The Neon Rain by James Lee Burke. It's the very first novel in the Dave Robichaux mystery series. And you might ask, why James Lee Burke? Well, that's a good question, but it's an easy one for me. Burke writes a gritty, often violent crime fiction, but he executes it in such a way that he has the flair and the heart of a poet. It's an odd mix and something you don't normally see. I compare that to juxtaposing the prose of Sean Cosby with that of maybe Karen Dion or William Kent Kruger. The result is a fascinating blend of the worst of human nature, and it's set against a glorious backdrop of Mother Nature's perfection. His fully fleshed out characters are driven, manipulative, and as real as your neighbors, with maybe just a pinch of Cajun spice thrown in for good measure. Situated in New Orleans and New Iberia Parish, Louisiana, Burke's 23-book Robichaux series delves into many relevant topics, including racism, mysticism, the country's historical struggles. Always lyrical, his stories highlight the constant battle between good and evil, the powerful and the powerless, and the thinnest of membranes separating our past from the present. His stories entertain, but his words inspire. If you'll bear with me for a second, I want to read just a short passage from The Neon Rain, which I think exemplifies what I'm talking about. Early the next morning, I drove southwest of New Orleans into the Bayou country. It was the South Louisiana I had grown up in, around New Iberia. Oak, cypress, and willow trees lined the two-lane road. The midst still hung like torn cotton to half-submerged dead tree trunks back in the marsh. The canebrakes were thick and green, shining in the light, and the lily pads clustered along the bayou's banks were bursting with flowers, audibly popping, their leaves covered with drops of quicksilver. The bream and bass were still feeding in the shadows close to the cypress roots. Egrets were nesting in the sand where the sun had risen above the tree line. And occasionally a heron would lift from its feeding place on the edge of the cattails and glide on gilded wings down the long ribbon of brown water through a corridor of trees. There are innumerable talented novelists out there, and I count myself fortunate to have read many of them. But of the authors that I have read, if I were to only be allowed to choose one to aspire to, it would be James Lee Burke. If you haven't read The Neon Rain, grab a copy of the novel and dig in. If you have read it, pull it out of your bookshelf and read it again. You won't regret it. Trust me, it's that good.
Awesome. I'm gonna have to go grab a copy because I have not read it, but I will because you are one of the coolest people I've ever met. And if anyone wants to feel really cool, go find Bruce at the bar at any conference and listen to his tales of crime fighting over the years that he's done. It's great to see you, my friend. I'm glad that you're here.
Likewise. Thank you.
I'll see you in person very soon. I'm looking forward to it.
Yes.
Our next guest is Tracy Clark. Tracy is the author of the Cass Raines Chicago Mystery Series and the Detective Harriet Foster series. She is also the winner of the 2020 and 2022 Sue Grafton Memorial Award and the 2022 Sarah Paretsky Award, and is a proud member of the Crime Writers of Color, Mystery Writers of America, and Sisters in Crime. We'd love to welcome Tracy Clark to the show. Hi, Tracy.
Hi, everybody. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me. Let's see. I took the title of this endeavor quite literally. We are what we read. I am what I read. And my selection for today is Indemnity Only by Sarah Paretsky, my all-time favorite author. I'm just going to say that this book for me was a sea change. When it was released in 1982, up until that point, I had been sort of tripping lightly through St. Mary Mead with the Agatha Christie series. And so this was a wonderful sort of bizarre sort of thing that happened for me in 1982. It just sort of blew the doors off the bus. And I don't think that I was a quarter ways through the first chapter before I was completely hooked with this character. It was not just that she was a private investigator working the gritty streets of Chicago, my hometown. It sort of had the tropes of a PI novel, wonderful, but it took it to a different level. She was a female private investigator, where she was doing the job, but there was levels to this character. She had a wonderful backstory, immigrant upbringing, grew up in the shadow of the steel mills on the southeast side of Chicago, tough, gritty, in there for the fight, tilting at windmills. So that sort of drew me right in. I'm just going to tell you what this book is about, but it's about more than that. It's just going to give you a little summary of what it is, and then I'll go on. But hired by a man who calls himself John Thayer, VI's assignment is to find Thayer's son Peter's missing girlfriend. But when VI finds young Peter's dead body instead, her client disappears. Her efforts to track down her client and learn his true identity take her deep into a labyrinth of fraud and violence. The great thing about VI is that, she doesn't do divorce cases like, some of the old guys did. She is into white collar crime, corrupt politicians, greedy corporations, insurance companies that sort of bleeding the little guy. So we've got a David and Goliath sort of confrontation going on. And she sort of goes profoundly deep with this. The writing style is absolutely perfect. It's taut, it's lean, it's tight. And I was hooked, as I said. And we are now 26 books into this series. I don't think VI is going anywhere anytime soon. She has only grown more profound and deep. And I cannot say enough about this series and about this writer and about this book. Pick it up if you can. And again, for me personally, it opened the door to all these wonderful female crime writers that came after her. Grafton, Mueller, Marin, all of them. That led to others, Valerie Wilson Wesley, Eleanor Taylor Bland, wonderful writers. Put me on the path. I'm still on it. And my goal, profoundly, is to sort of produce something that sort of gets anywhere close to what these women are doing. So that's my selection. Check it out.
Thanks so much, Tracy. Yes, Sarah is a legend. We can't really go wrong with her. And I think you're well on your way to getting there. So keep it up. I love your books, as you well know.
Thank you.
Our next guest is Joseph Goodrich. Joseph Goodrich has been described by Ellery Queen Mystery Magazine as one of the most versatile writers in the mystery field. An Edgar Award-winning playwright, his work has been produced across the United States as well as in Canada, China, and Australia. His fiction and nonfiction have appeared in Ellery Queen Mystery Magazine, Alfred Hitchcock Mystery Magazine, Mystery Scene, and Crime Spree. Welcome, Joseph.
Thank you. Good to be here. When Kristopher very kindly invited me to be a part of We Are What We Read, several titles sprang immediately to mind. Nicholas Meyer's Confession of a Homing Pigeon, Reflections in a Golden Eye by Carson McCullers, and Had I 100 Mouths by the late, great William Goyen. Kafka famously observed that a book must be the axe for the frozen sea inside us. The book I ultimately chose to talk about today is, for me, less of an axe and more of a small thermonuclear device. Barry Gifford's Port Tropique. Gifford is best known in mystery circles as the founder of Black Lizard Books, which in the early 80s reprinted then difficult to find titles by Jim Thompson, David Goodis, and Charles Willeford, among others, and paved the way for the critical and popular rebirth of these and other neglected masters of the dark, dangerous, and despairing. Black Lizard also published Port Tropique, Gifford's first excursion into neo-noir. It's a short book, but a lot is packed into its 136 pages. The main character is Franz Hall. Franz is 40, may or may not be a writer, and might well be responsible for the death of his 8-year-old son at some point prior to the start of the book. Whatever happened destroyed his relationship with the boy's mother and set him on his aimless, wandering path. Franz is leading a kind of half-life in the bars and zocalos of Port Tropique, a fictitious locale somewhere south of the border. He makes his money as a bagman for smugglers of fake ivory. When the political scene boils into revolution, Franz takes advantage of the chaos and absconds with the smuggler's moolah. Near the end of the book, he assesses his situation. So here I am, he thought, sitting in a little stinking room in a tent-rate hotel in a town occupied by a rebel army, expecting to be attacked any day. I've got 2 handguns, $500,000 in stolen cash I can't spend in a suitcase under the bed, and no place to go where I can do myself any good. If he ever wrote a book, Franz decided, he would put into it everyone he had ever liked or disliked. It would be called Tragic Creatures. Gifford's approach to plot is oblique. He offers us what might be called a string of vignettes, or even better, a collection of snapshots in an untitled photo album. The narrative voice is flat, circumspect, influenced by B. Traven, Hemingway, Camus. Gifford evokes those and other voices from beyond the grave, all the nothing left to lose losers, narrating their deadpan tragedies in one book or film or another. He quite openly draws on noir tropes and filters them through an ironic, modernist sensibility. I first read Port Tropique in 1986. Its effect on me was explosive. I was knocked out by it, by its structure, by the way its disparate scenes grew in cumulative power, by its mixture of the literary and the programmatic, by what was said as much as by what wasn't. I return to it every 5 or 6 years. Sometimes it's still a punch in the gut. Sometimes I wonder what I saw in it. It doesn't matter, really. It sticks with me, draws me back. It's had a powerful impact on my life as a reader and my work as a playwright. Under its spell, I wrote a piece called Terminal Exit. Thinking back on it now, I might just easily have called it Tragic Creatures. Thank you, Kristopher. Thank you, Shawn. And thanks to my compatriots for sharing your own cherished titles. I can't wait to hear what other books are going to be recommended today. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And there's another one that I'm going to have to look into. And this is what is so great about the show, because I've worked at every bookstore there was. I managed a bookstore, and I've not come across that title. So now I'm going to have to. This show is very expensive. I need to keep adding books to my list. So thank you so much for sharing that, and thanks for being here. I appreciate it. Our next guest is Curtis Ippolito. Curtis lives in San Diego and is the author of the crime novel Burying the Newspaper Man. He's an Anthony Award finalist for this year's Best Short Story He is also a member of Sisters in Crime and serves on the board of San Diego Sisters in Crime chapter. That's a tongue twister. How you doing, Curtis? Welcome to the show.
I'm good. Thank you, Shawn. Appreciate the invite by you and Kristopher. It's a pleasure to join you for this. My book that I chose is Mystic River by Dennis Lehane. It's probably my favorite crime novel of all time. Though it's a modernish book, in actuality, it's more than 20 years old now. It's one of those books that I'll always be chasing as an author. So the story of Mystic River it follows three childhood friends, Dave Boyle, Shawn Devine, and Jimmy Marcus, who have their worlds turned upside down as adults when one of Jimmy's daughters is murdered. The book is told in multiple points of view, primarily from these three friends, but also portions from their loved ones. There's so many things I love about this book, but recently, when I reread it, I was struck by two elements the most. First, although it's a multi-point of view book, every character feels not only real, but substantial. The characterization Lehane does in the first 100 pages alone are borderline black magic. It's just incredible. Each character feels fully realized through his deeply moving yet not overdone prose. And then the second thing I love about this book is it's a heart-wrenching read. It's sad, devastating, funny in parts, and where each of these characters end up at the end of the book leaves me breathless every time I read it. It takes you on such an emotional roller coaster, starting with the backstory of these friends' childhoods and how that informed their present and their future in many ways. It's really one of those books where I just hope one day to write a book that's half as emotionally impactful in scope and resonance.
Thank you so much, Curtis. And I can actually see how that book could have influenced Burying the Newspaper Man. So it's a great choice. And what I love about this show is that we have Sarah Paretsky, James Lee Burke, and Dennis Lehane, and then we have Barry Gifford that people don't know. So we're bringing everything to the table, and that's so great. Next up, we have my dear friend, Erin LaBonte-McKay. Erin is a lifelong reader and book collector. She lives in Escondido, California, just 15 minutes from the San Diego Zoo Safari Park. She loves coffee and reading outdoors. She is also a stay-at-home mom to a totally inspiring middle schooler, as well as being a Girl Scout co-leader and a dedicated procrastinator. Her favorite books, and I can definitely attest to this, her favorite books are all the books. Welcome, Erin.
Hi, thank you, Chris, and hello, Shawn, and everyone else. The book I've chosen to discuss today is Dark Down by Thomas Mullen. Okay, I think the first time I ever heard about this book was at BoucherCon in 2014 in Long Beach, which seems like it was a very long time ago. It was pitched during a panel as a story of the first Black police officers in Atlanta and how fraught and complicated that job was for men of color in the South after World War II, but before the Civil Rights Movement began to really pick up speed. It's a slice of time I had no previous reference for. And here is a quote from the book. Quote, "When he'd first signed on for the job, he'd been focused on the momentousness of the occasion, the responsibility and the uniform and the gun and the awesome weight of things he might be called upon to do. The Colored Eight's first day had been much ballyhooed across town, complete with the mayor offering a speech to an overflowing crowd. Their first shift practically turned into a parade, everyone along Auburn Avenue following their every move, taking photos, writing poems. It seemed so long ago already. Boggs had been perhaps too enamored with the romanticism of the moment, not thinking enough about how he would be arresting people for things like gambling and drinking that they felt were their God-given right, intervening in marital disputes that had no true solution, and staring up close at horrific societal problems that seemed almost cocky in their intractability. He'd known what he was getting into. He just hadn't braced himself for the accumulated weight of doing it hour after hour, night after night. and it had barely been 4 months. He had needed purpose. The story follows 2 Black men, Lucius Boggs and Tommy Smith, who were partnered up as part of the brand new 8-man unit to patrol the Black neighborhoods in Atlanta. Their white foils are a deeply racist older officer and his less racist rookie partner, and you can probably already guess how that goes. The Black officers have a white sergeant who would rather be doing anything else. They aren't allowed to make arrests, even of Black citizens. They don't get a weapon or a patrol car. They can't even go into the police station. And their neighbors and community feel betrayed every time they try to do their job. The officers' territory, the neighborhood known as Darktown, has been ignored and harassed for such a long time that they have learned to handle their own shit and resent police officers of any color involving themselves in their disputes. When Boggs and Smith witnessed an older white man drunkenly driving around Darktown with an underage woman who later turns up dead in a trash heap, absolutely no one is willing to help find out what happened, because everyone knows that solving the crime won't change anything for anyone. Darktown is where white folks go to get away with something. There's a constant pull between Boggs and Smith, one or the other just trying to live through their shift, go along to get along, the other trying to stand up to the corruption and bigotry that stare them in the face every waking hour. It's a hard line to toe, and the boundaries are blurry. Even the white rookie, Rakestraw, seems both uncomfortable with the brutality and malice displayed by his partner and the more senior officers, and also accepting of its inevitability and just waiting for it to be over. I spent the whole book waiting for him to be a better person. My husband is a police officer in San Diego. He's held a variety of positions, including with vice, homicide, and robbery over the last 16 years. He's very cool. He is a good man and a good officer. He's proud of his job and the work that he does, and so am I. But it can be difficult to discuss the flaws in his profession with him without specific examples and documented history. Most of the time, I don't even know where to start. This book has been an incredible jumping off point. It lives right in the front of my head. It shows how segregated areas form and develop, why they can seem stagnant from the outside, and exactly how complicated it is to live there. There's just absolutely no way to just leave. Examining the racial inequalities and institutional difficulties from the point of view of this liminal character, a war veteran, a police officer, educated, respected in his community, yet discriminated against, and undermined at every turn, it's brilliant. They only want to do their jobs and do them well, weave into the fabric of their communities, and perhaps even help bring them together, but they just can't. The ending of this book is inevitable, frustrating, and difficult, and it feels very authentic. The best way I've ever read to explain redlining and how it plays out in even the smallest ways. I recommend this book all the time, especially to people who want to understand the history of modern policing and institutionalized racism in America. There are 2 more books in the series, The Lightning Men and Midnight Atlanta. Hopefully I'm sparking interest rather than spilling tea, but these next 2 books have one of our protagonists moving into journalism, which is also a fascinating perspective at this time, and more well-known figures and events in civil rights begin to appear. Cannot recommend this book highly enough.
Thank you so much. I remember that Long Beach BoucherCon, and I remember getting my copy of that book too, and I loved it as well. So I'm really glad you brought this to us today, and it was a really great recommendation, and thanks for being here. I also had dinner with our next guest in Long Beach at that BoucherCon. So I'll be introducing my friend Joni Langvoort. Joni is a former board member of Mouse Domestic, like me, where she served as the publisher and sponsor liaison for a long, long time. The last creative writing she did was a short story in 9th grade about the Boston Strangler, and it earned a cool A-. but she writes a pretty good email, fairly witty Facebook status updates, and can do a mean annual report for the church outreach committee when called upon. Once upon a time, she was a lawyer, and her license still hangs on the wall of the laundry room. That's been in your bio for a really long time. Joni, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Shawn and Kristopher. I'm delighted to be here. I'm a little perplexed to be here in this company. I'm feeling kind of fangirl. You know, these are some of my favorite authors here, so I'm going to try to be cool and not too silly. I'm coming to you from a house sitting gig. These are not my things. This is not my dog back here, but we are moving into our new house on Monday. And I cannot wait to be reunited with my books. I miss them so much. Boxes and boxes to unpack. And that's a priority when we move to a new place. Unpack the books, get them on the shelves. My book today is by someone you all may know pretty well, or you might not know much about him, but you need to know him. I stumbled across Bill Fitzhugh's first book, Pest Control, when I was in the mystery section of a local bookstore in the mid-90s, and a stranger recommended it to me. I had never read such a bizarrely hilarious book. So I wrote Bill a fan email, and we became fast friends, friendship still going strong. We discovered pretty quickly that he had taken one of my sorority sisters to his high school prom. And I have eagerly snapped up every book he's written ever since then. But the one I'd like to share today is Radioactivity. This is from 2004, and I picked it up for a couple of reasons, for several reasons today. First, it's a pretty good mystery. Our protagonist, Rick, is a classic rock FM radio DJ in Jackson, Mississippi, which is where Bill is from. It's also my hometown. Hence the sorority sister going to the prom together. So Bill knows whereof he writes when he writes about classic rock. Second, a fascinating part of this story is, what's the definition of classic rock? When did it start? When did it end? Did it start maybe with Elvis, or with the birth of the Beatles, or with some other album or year in the 60s? When did it end? Did it end with the death of the Beatles, the breakup? Did it end with punk and disco? Did it end maybe with the birth of MTV, some other year in the 70s, maybe even the 80s? When he was writing the book, I was one of the friends he asked for an opinion on what's classic rock and when did it start. And I got to give my views on that. And one of the characters in the book actually presents my case and is promptly shot down. But hey, at least I did get in there. My story did get there. Another reason, another reason is that it's a hilarious book. Everything Bill writes is just a little bit borderline crazy. Great fun. And this one's no exception. And the final reason for this, for choosing this book, is that I'm in it, or at least my name is. I am Joni Lang, Miss Loblolly Pine. And I admit in the book that my real name is Joni Langvoort, but I shortened it for entertainment industry purposes. The real me is only 5 feet tall, and I'm introduced, and yes, I have memorized this because this is quite an intro, as not the tallest beauty pageant winner Rick had ever seen, but the pinky red, spike-heeled, open-toed pumps she was perched on gave her the allure of a 6-foot strumpet. I mean, what an intro. That's me, right? So he sent me an email when he was writing the book and said, "What is your least favorite, most hated classic rock song?" And I said immediately, without a doubt, it's Steve Miller Band's Take the Money and Run, because this song rhymes Texas, facts is, justice, and taxes. And I mean, that's just wrong. So that's why I picked that song. And what do you think Joni Lang's favorite classic rock song was? Yeah, Take the Money and Run. I was so mad. But there it is then. So I would recommend to you any book that Bill Fitzhugh writes. His latest is A Perfect Harvest, where he manages to make organ transplants and terminal illness hilariously funny. But if you're looking for a book that is clever, well-written, fast-paced, offbeat, not remotely subtle and funny, pick up one of Bill's books. And if you like rock and roll, go for this one too.
Thanks so much, Joni. A little behind the scene here. We've been trying to get Joni on the show for a while now because she's been moving around, so she hasn't had a residence. So I actually was able to grab a copy of Bill Fitzhugh's book because I had not read it, and she's absolutely right. It's hilarious, and it's just a very interesting music mystery. So I loved it. So thanks for that choice, Joni. Our next guest is Jennifer J. Chow. Agatha, Anthony, and Lefty Award nominated author Jennifer J. Chow writes the LA Night Market Mysteries. Death by Bubble Tea was in the New York Times Book Review and hit the SoCal Indie bestseller list. She belongs to Crime Writers of Color, blogs at Chicks on the Case, and lives online at jenniferjchow.com. Thanks so much for joining us, Jen.
Great. Thanks for having me. Really am honored to be here. So special thanks to Kristopher and Shawn for inviting me. My pick is Death at the Crossroads by Dale Furutani. And this is book 1 in his Samurai Mysteries series. This is a special book for me because I found it at the library. I stumbled on it, and it was the first mystery that I read by an Asian American author with cultural themes in it. And I really felt reflected by reading the book, and also realized that I could also add heritage into my stories. So that's why I chose it. It's set in 17th century Japan. It's about a Ronin samurai named Matsuyama Kaze who finds a dead body with an arrow stuck in it at a crossroads. So the local officials there could care less about this death of this measly merchant, and they put the blame on an innocent peasant. But Kaze steps in to really bring true justice to the situation. But what I love about this book is that Furutani uses not only the viewpoint of the samurai main character, but he's able to switch to different perspectives within the story. And he even weaves in flashbacks, which really work for the story. And it's done in a seamless way, and it keeps your attention. There's also, of course, a lot of history and culture in the book. 1603 Japan is where it's set, and that's the turning point in Japan. It's right before the Tokugawa shogunate. And so there's some sharp commentary there about the treatment of different social classes and treatment of women during that time, which is woven into the fiction, but is insightful. And I also love how the clues are imbued with cultural meaning. There's a reveal at the end of the book that really ties in a lot of heritage, which I think is done wonderfully. And also, it's like a 2-for-1 book in the sense that it has multiple mysteries in it. So Death at the Crossroads has the Crossroads mystery, where you have the current murder. And there's a lot of interesting things about the dead body. Why is it at a crossroads? You know, is it really a merchant who died? And what is that distinctive looking arrow stuck in the merchant? But not only that, there's another mystery, which is where the samurai is trying to fulfill the dying wish of his lord's wife, and he's finding a missing person. So that's like another mystery that you're also trying to solve at the same time. And what I also really like is there's a haiku for each chapter. So there's a little bit of the content of the chapter and some foreshadowing. And I just love how the poetry kind of lends this like this extra special magical touch to the book. And so that's why I would recommend it.
Oh, that sounds so good. I have to read that one too, and I have to go out and get that one. Thank you, Jennifer. We're definitely gonna but I love the haiku thing. That's gonna be, you just sold me. I'm gonna go get it and read it. Thank you for being here. So appreciate it. Our last but not least final guest is Hank Phillippi Ryan. She is the USA Today bestselling author of 14 thrillers, winning 5 Agathas, the coveted Mary Higgins Clark Award, and 37 Emmys for her television investigative reporting. Her newest novel is the page-turning standalone The House Guest, a story of psychological manipulation, exploring the dark heart of marriage and friendship. It's Gaslight meets Thelma and Louise, Publishers Weekly says. Ryan is a master of suspense. The Library Journal Star Review calls it binge-worthy. I have a huge amount of respect for Hank. I've known her for a very long time. She was actually at Long Beach too. She was my auctioneer. I helped out with the auction. And I've gained so much more respect for her over the last few weeks because it's really hard to talk into a camera and actually read and talk into a camera and not sound crazy. So now I think Hank is a master of all these things. So thank you so much for being here, Hank. Take it away.
Thank you. It's really amazing to be here. When you and Kristopher asked me to be on this program, I was thrilled, of course, absolutely so. But then I was really terrified because how do you pick a book that made me, how do I pick a book that made me the writer I am today, whatever that means? I mean, I remember reading Murder on the Orient Express when I was about 12 years old and thinking, how did she do that? But you don't need me to tell you about Agatha Christie. I read Edith Wharton's Custom of the Country and was blown away by the dialogue and by the social commentary, and I aspired to be Edith Wharton. 2 more quickly, The Firm by John Grisham, which was formative, and Presumed Innocent by Scott Turow, and The Charm School by Nelson DeMille, but you don't need me to tell you about Nelson DeMille and Scott Turow. So I picked a contemporary novel, not brand new, but a book that was staggeringly life-changing for me personally and as an author, and I'll try to tell you why. It is Wrong Place, Wrong Time by Gillian McAllister. On the cover of this book is a blurb from another one of my favorite authors, the fabulous Lisa Jewell. And Lisa Jewell said, "It's perfection, every word, every moment, a masterpiece. One of the best books I've ever read." Now that is saying a lot, but I have to say I agree with her about this. Now, a little setup about it. The marvelous author Sophie Hannah once told me that her goal in every book was to have on page 1, something impossible happen. Something impossible happen. And Wrong Place, Wrong Time, just one of the things that's fabulous about this book is that something impossible happens. The question is, how do you stop a murder that has already happened? How do you stop a murder that has already happened? So in this book, a woman sees her son stab someone, murder someone, kill them. And she doesn't understand why. Her family is happy. This is unusual. This is strange. But she sees this happen. It is unmistakable. And this has absolutely happened. It's true. She is devastated. She falls asleep. And when she wakes up the next morning, it is the day before the murder. It is the day before the murder. And then she goes to sleep that night. And when she wakes up again, it is 2 days before the murder. And she begins to realize that every day it is the day before that, and it's the day before that, and then it's the month before that, and then it's the year before that. And the main character is baffled by it, then terrified by it, and then she begins to test it, and then she begins to understand it, and then she begins to use it. And that is so chilling and good. Reading this book like a reader, I was absolutely enchanted and involved, and I couldn't turn the pages fast enough to find out what happened. The story itself, the plot, is propulsive and compelling. And think about it. All of us who are writers, and readers too, worry about backstory dumps, right? How since the flow of a story has to be forward, it impedes the story's momentum if you go backwards. But in this book, the whole key of Wrong Place, Wrong Time is that the story goes backwards. The situation is completely reversed. So marvelous story in an ingenious structure. It's brilliant. But reading the story like a writer, equally fabulous, but a totally different deal. Because reading the story as a writer, and we all do this, I'm instantly trying to deconstruct what the author is doing and why they did it and how they did it and what's going to happen. We all try to second guess in novels and figure it out and see if we can figure it out before the author tells us. I'm totally guilty of that, and I cannot resist. But and writing as an author, I'm reading very critically. I'm also thinking, oh, I would have done it this way. Where is she going with this? I might have edited this. It's very difficult to turn off that critical mind. So I have to say, when I started reading Wrong Place, Wrong Time, and I will confess to you, my very first thought was, she is never going to be able to pull this off. This is never going to work. She's never going to be able to do this. She set up this impossible dilemma that's going to either end up being stupid or ridiculous or far-fetched or pulling a punch. It's never going to work. So I was riveted, but I was absolutely skeptical. I would confess that to you. But she did it. She totally pulled it off. I almost stood and cheered at the end of the book. It makes so much sense. It's so believable. And how do you do that in a time loop novel? I mean, we all understand, we think we do, the rules of time travel. And we understand when you go back in time, if you change something, it's going to be a mess at the end. You know, what if you go back and you change things and you were never born? You know, what's going to happen then? So time loop is very difficult. But McAllister understands that problem and embraces it and deals with it, and with rules that are completely believable. And there's one more thing about this, and I know I'm going on a little bit, but there's one more thing. It's not only an incredible murder mystery and a wonderful thriller and a superb novel of domestic suspense, but it is massively thought-provoking and life-changing. The theme of this book, in my opinion, is how all of us in our everyday lives miss things. We're so focused on ourselves and what we're doing that we don't notice what others are doing, the people we love. We don't notice what's going on around. We don't pick up on things. We don't focus on things. And as a result, in our everyday lives, we miss clues that might have led us to understand people or help people or even prepare for the future. We just miss those things because we're in such a hurry all the time. And also, we don't remember, and this is in this murder mystery, in this thriller, McAllister shows us that we don't remember how happy we were or how lucky we were at certain points of our lives, that we never take the time to think, oh, this is fun, this is rewarding, or I'm lucky, or I'm loved. We're just rushing forward so fast that we forget to enjoy our lives. Yes, all this is in a thriller. This was such a consciousness-raising book for me about how every moment in our lives is important, how we have to notice things and how we have to be present and in the open and in the moment and have our minds be open to the world, not just be tunnel visioned. The thing that makes this, bottom line, a special book for me is not only that it is a terrific story, wonderfully structured and wonderfully told, but the themes remain with me long after the book is over. And I can tell you that it also taught me to be brave in my own writing. Gillian McAllister said the germ of her novel came from watching Russian Doll on TV. And let me tell you, this is not Russian Doll at all, but just a Russian Doll was the domino that pushed this book into being. And this book, Wrong Place, Wrong Time by Gillian McAllister, is the domino that got pushed over for me as well. And someday I will tell you and her all about it. But right now, I'm happy just to say I'm very grateful for that. So Wrong Place, Wrong Time. How do you stop a murder after it's already happened? I cannot recommend this book enough. It is one of the best books I have ever read.
Thanks so much, Hank. I too loved it. It's really, McAllister has written a structural masterpiece. I mean, it's very, very, very complex, and I can't believe she pulled it off either. Another great choice, and we spend our hour looking back at books, so we wanted to add a new coda to our episode here where we're going to take Shawn and I just look forward for a moment at books that are coming up. So this is our new segment. My first choice for the new segment will be Kelly J. Ford's The Hunt. The Hunt is a book that takes place in Presley, Arkansas. They have an annual tradition every Easter where the whole town participates in a hunt for a golden egg around the town. However, for 17 years, somebody has died during these hunts. looking like accidents, but half of the town is convinced it's a serial killer that's using the activities of the hunt to also become a hunter and find their next victim. So our main character is Nell, and she is the sister of the first victim, and she also carries some guilt about that, what happened to him. So she's been raising her nephew since he was born, and now that this 17-year-old is becoming independent, he sort of wants to get involved in the hunt, and she's not real comfortable with that, thinking that there's a serial killer out there. A brilliant book. Kelly J. Ford has been writing. The first two books were excellent, so I'm looking really forward to this one, and I hope you guys will check that one out.
Absolutely. I love her writing. She's a wonderful person too. She's a lot of fun. A lot of fun to have a drink with as well. I know that for sure. There's a theme here. This is the first time we've been asked to do this, so I just thought of this is the first book that popped in my head. I said I'm just going to go with it. I just met this author. She's a rising young voice. I'm really looking forward to this book called Who We Are Now. It's coming out next month in August. The author is Lauren Chamberlain. She's not a thriller mystery writer. It's fiction, but it's a story of four friends who graduate Northwestern at the same time. They move to New York City with grand plans about how life is going to be, and then it fast forwards. It takes them through 15 years of life and how you get to that point of your life. It's a very interesting time in your life where you're like, okay, I'm just going to go to New York and be a famous writer or do whatever, and that doesn't always happen because life happens. So it's sort of like inspired partially by Meg Wolitzer's The Interestings, and I get like the big chill kind of vibe off of it. So I'm really looking forward to diving in and reading it. And Lauren, I had the good fortune of meeting her recently, and she's a rising young voice, and I'm really excited to. I got an early copy, so I'm looking forward to reading that. It's coming out in August. So that's mine.
Thanks so much, Shawn, and thanks for giving in to my need to look forward at the last minute. You did well. Next time we'll be a little more prepared for that. Thank you all for joining us tonight for We Are What We Read. This is episode 4. We're 1/3 of the way through the year-long commitment I have made for this series. I hope that you will come back for future ones, and if you've missed the earlier ones, please watch them. And until then, read often and read widely. Thanks so much, guys.